Hello and welcome to this episode of Book Club. Today we're going to focus on how poetry is written nowadays. In Book Club today, I want to answer the question, how do we write poetry? And I want to answer the question, how is contemporary poetry written? Disclaimer, I'm going to be using material which is copyright. Please respect the fact that these poems were written by Pamilerin Jacob and that his work is copyright. Please do not use his work in any of your poems. So, disclaimer out of the way. I want to answer the question, how is contemporary poetry written? You will agree with me that poetry is like music. It changes. I have often used the example of Afrobeats. If I said to yourself, would you like listening to Fela Kuti's style of Afrobeats, or do you much prefer the contemporary style of David O and Burna Boy? Probably you would go for the latter two. Wouldn't you? You probably would prefer listening to David O's and Burna Boy's music, because that's what you were raised up on. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is poetry. The issue is some of us don't read contemporary works. We don't follow organisations like the Poetry Foundation or the National Poetry Society. So we don't know what contemporary poetry is like. Let's have a working definition of what poetry is. Forget about everything else that you've been told. You don't need a professional qualification to write good poetry. You don't need to have a PhD in English, although you have to speak very good English. You don't need a PhD in literature to write good poetry. So let's quote a definition from the Poetry Foundation, and that's what I use on this page. A poem is an arrangement of language that conveys a story, an idea, or an emotion. I'm going to use Pamilerin's work to show you how poetry conveys his story, his ideas, and his emotions, the way Pamilerin felt about an issue.
Ladies and gentlemen, we want to say thanks to Pamilerin for again allowing us to use his work for teaching purposes. The poem on your screen is titled Genealogy of Stigma. I did say we were going to look at form, language, narrative, and theme. Well, I would like to approach his poems, first of all, by talking about the form of his poetry. Do you remember when I did an interview with Pamilerin when he said that his poems were based on nocturnes? Let's have a look at what a nocturne is. Well, you're right if you said that it's so. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to say thanks to Pamilerin for again allowing us to use his work for teaching purposes. The poem on your screen is titled Genealogy of Stigma. I did say we were going to look at form, language, narrative, and theme. Well, I would like to approach his poems, first of all, by talking about the form of his poetry. Do you remember when I did an interview with Pamilerin when he said that his poems were based on nocturnes? Let's have a look at what a nocturne is. Well, you're right if you say that it's a sheet of music. That's all it is. It's a music sheet. So let's see how the form, the layout of Pamilerin's poem looks a little bit like how musical notes are arranged on a sheet. Can you see how he structured his lines? So the poem is kind of, I'm not going to say it's disjointed. It's kind of fragmented, isn't it? Let's now quickly have a read of it, listen to it, and tell me what you make of his language. Genealogy of stigma. First of all, genealogy. What does that mean? Has it got to do with how you talk about your ancestry? To talk about genes and the makeup? So how come stigma has its own genealogy? And what does stigma mean? Stigma. There you go. That's the definition of stigma on the screen. Is mental health often seen as an embarrassing illness in countries like Nigeria? How about in sub-Saharan Africa? If you remember when I wrote a book with Pemba who suffers with schizophrenia, the Malawian gentleman, misjudged and misperceived. Remember when we were launching the book, when we had a doctor here from Malawi who was telling us about the stigma of mental ill health in sub-Saharan Africa? Please listen as I read the first part of the poem. I want you to listen to Pamilerin's choice of words. You're now listening for words where sounds are repeated. You're also going to listen for very strong verbs. So listen for nouns and verbs. Listen for other content words as well. There are a few adjectives, but Pamilerin's poetry thrives on the relationship between nouns and verbs. So listen for how he uses a lot of very strong verbs, and also listen for how words are repeated. Some nouns are repeated as well. I want you to see how he's made a connection between his theme and the poem of itself in the body of the poem, how he's going to demonstrate what he calls the genealogy of stigma. Of course, the question is, how can stigma have a genealogy? I mean, has it got its own DNA? Has it got a lineage? Has it got children? So let's see how that plays out. Genealogy of stigma. Can you see that stigma is in brackets? Why has he done that? What do you think? When you use brackets or parentheses, is that to say it's something that adds additional information, but you could read the line without what is in bracket? What do you think? Listen to the next line. Genealogy of stigma. The book of the generation of stigma. The daughter of fear, the son of ignorance. So we're now looking at the family tree. Oh, bless. So he did say that the poem is about the genealogy of stigma. So stigma is the daughter of fear. And is fear the son of ignorance? So ignorance begat fear, and fear begat stigma, is it? Do you think it's talking about the ignorance with which people approach mental health? The thing that if you have a serious mental disorder, that it's something to be very ashamed of. Okay, let's carry on. And ignorance begat insecurity, and insecurity begat shame, and shame begat fear, and fear begat a mother operating a son's tongue when she finds sadness in his mouth. Let's stop for a minute. So do you see the link between how the family of stigma is being played out now in the part's own biological family? He's mentioned his mother. Later on, he mentions his father and his brother. So, we're looking at two families here. Can you see the link between the Stigma's family and his family? And how about the actions of his and biological family members? What do they do? So now we're going to make a link between how the family of stigma operates and how the parts or the narrator's family behave. So the parts or the narrator's biological family, I suppose that's who is depicted in this poem. Fear gave birth to a mother. Whose mother is it? Whose mother do you think it is? Is it the poet's mother? What do you think? Because don't forget, I said we're going to look at narrative. And in this poem, we see that the speaker has employed the third person narrative to begin with. So he's used pronouns like him, her son. So we're talking about third person. Do you think that this family is actually the poet's family? What do you think?
Well, I'm a poet, but also a journalist. Yeah, and yes, also a journalist. So the poems I started writing a couple of years back. I was going through some things with my health, and I was admitted in the hospital.
Sorry
So yes, so that was when I would say the intensity of the writing. That was when it came on. Regarding at least writing history, so to speak, for me, that's where. So when I was in the hospital, I had access to. I demanded for books, and the psychiatrists, they had no choice but to answer me, because the books I was demanding, they were useful for my process, and then I would discuss poems with the psychologist, or talk about poems. I was still pretty young and impressionable. So yes, that's regarding the poems. That's where uh, I always love poems, right? There's a mainstream, there's the industrial complex, so to speak, of poetry. So I always loved poems from a distance, and I used to write a host of things even before the hospital admission. But it was when I got admitted that my interest in the whole thing really picked up, and yeah.
Intimacy turned inside out. Ladies and gentlemen, this last poem from Pamilerin is from one of his e-chapbooks titled Songs of Repair. Intimacy turned inside out. The mouth that used to kiss you is now whipping into a pillow. It's now full of mucus and invectives, hurled at the heavens, its angels and its elders. Intimacy turned inside out is loneliness. The latch on my mind is loose, and monsters fill the arena of the afternoons. The days bend until they become psyches. Flipping, laughter and glee. Above all philosophies sits love, smiling at my toil. Even if we were an error of fate, we burned bright enough, beautiful, even in ruin.